Victoria Cross slid the paper across the polished mahogany conference table like she was offering me a discarded coffee receipt, not slicing my entire professional life in half. "This is your revised salary structure," she said, her voice dripping with calculated corporate warmth. I looked down at the printed page once, then looked again to verify I was not misreading the figures. Same title of Principal Enterprise Architect, same 3 primary client accounts, same high-stakes operational deliverables, but my base compensation figure had been slashed by exactly 50%, dropping from $240,000 down to $120,000. My name is Grant Sullivan. I am 54 years old, and I had spent the last 12 years of my career building the core software and database infrastructure of Apexis Solutions from a fragile startup framework into an enterprise platform. I joined when employee count was under 20, working 80-hour weeks to design systems that now process billions of transaction requests without a single failure. What I said before I could restrain myself was short, quiet, and raw. A 50% pay cut? Victoria did not blink or exhibit a single trace of hesitation. Her cold blue eyes remained steady and unyielding. "That is our revised operational overhead model for the upcoming fiscal cycle. We are realigning senior engineering compensation across all business units to maximize operating margins for our upcoming quarterly report." The conference room felt unnaturally cold and sterile. The soundproof, frosted glass walls completely isolated us from the bustling third-floor hallway outside, where dozens of junior engineers and database administrators were working on cloud deployment scripts I had personally authored. Brenda Jenkins from Human Resources sat quietly to Victoria's right, clutching a black leather folder tightly in her lap, with her eyes fixed intently on the carpet, refusing to make eye contact with me. I kept my right palm pressed flat against the cool mahogany surface so neither of them could observe my knuckles whitening. Victoria folded her meticulously manicured hands over the table. "If this adjusted compensation structure no longer aligns with your professional expectations, Grant, we will find someone who will replace you." That single sentence was the precise catalyst that transformed the entire nature of the encounter. It was not the staggering financial loss of $120,000 that struck me deepest. The monetary reduction was aggressive and unfair, but that polished, condescending sentence was pure executive contempt. It was the deliberate assertion that 12 years of foundational architecture work, late-night emergency recoveries, and unblemished client trust could be easily discarded like an outdated software license. I looked at Victoria again. I was not angry. I felt no surge of impulse or emotional heat. Instead, a profound clarity settled over me. I smiled. It was not a warm or agreeable smile, nor was it a broken mask of defeat. It was the calm, unshakable smile of an experienced engineer who realizes his opponent has just exposed her entire hand while remaining completely blind to the trap she has laid for herself. "Then I hope you find the right person soon," I said evenly. Brenda shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her paper folder rustling in the quiet room. Victoria's icy composure flickered for a brief fraction of a second, that tiny micro-expression executives exhibit when a subordinate strays from the script they spent days rehearsing. I picked up the single salary document, stood up deliberately, buttoned my suit jacket, and walked out of the executive suite before either woman could reframe the moment into a polite HR negotiation. Halfway down the glass corridor, I glanced down at the fine print printed in the bottom margin of the form. Listed directly beneath my official corporate title was an internal administrative classification code, Roll Code 409B. It was not my standard principal engineering code. Apexis reserved Roll Code 409B for junior entry-level contractors and temporary rotational staff. A sharp realization took shape in my mind. Why had Human Resources already generated official compensation paperwork under an internal contractor classification code that had never been discussed, evaluated, or disclosed to me? I walked straight back to my spacious corner office, stepped inside and pulled the solid wooden door shut without dialing a corporate attorney or venting to colleagues down the hall. I had zero interest in seeking emotional comfort. I required immediate, rigorous structural analysis. My desktop workstation was driving three live real-time monitoring dashboards spread across dual ultra-wide monitors. Those dashboards monitored the active cloud enterprise migration for our three premier corporate clients: Vanguard Health, Apex Global, and Pinnacle Financial. Together, these three enterprise accounts represented $45 million in combined annual contract value, representing over 60% of Apexis's total recurring revenue. The migration project was currently entering Phase 3, the most sensitive and volatile database cutover window of the entire four-year contract lifecycle. 7 years earlier, after Apexis acquired its main regional competitor, I had personally architected and coded the entire automated data migration engine from scratch. My proprietary framework governed our multi-region database replication, real-time transaction queuing, SOC 2 Type 2 compliance logging, and automated disaster recovery protocols. It ensured that high-volume enterprise transactions could bridge across legacy database servers and modern cloud clusters without experiencing a single millisecond of data corruption or service interruption. That proprietary framework was the sole operational anchor, keeping those three multi-million-dollar clients stable while the rest of our executive division managed marketing slides and corporate restructuring meetings. I laid the salary reduction form beside my master project calendar and began cross-referencing timestamps with surgical precision. The pattern became glaringly, undeniable obvious. Victoria Cross had not selected this specific week at random. She had not proposed this radical 50% salary slash during a quiet summer quarter or following a successfully completed client delivery. She had executed this aggressive cost-cutting maneuver exactly 72 hours prior to the critical Phase 3 database cutover window. It was a moment when everything appeared deceptively calm from the executive boardrooms, but where every single microservice pipeline depended entirely on the architect who understood where the architectural edge cases were buried. This was not a routine fiscal adjustment. It was a premeditated corporate extraction scheme. Victoria assumed I would either accept half my compensation and quietly carry the company through the dangerous cutover phase, anyway out of professional obligation, or that I would resign in an emotional outburst, leaving behind the operational architecture she intended to expropriate. Then I recalled a crucial legal provision buried deep within the master service agreement for Vanguard Health, our flagship enterprise client, accounting for $28 million of that total contract value. Section 14.2 of the agreement contained an explicit, unyielding key personnel continuity provision. It stipulated clearly that if the designated principal enterprise architect was removed, reassigned, or replaced without prior 90-day written notification and formal client authorization, Vanguard Health possessed the unconditional contractual right to freeze all pending milestone payments, halt active system integrations, and initiate an immediate independent technical audit of the entire platform. Victoria Cross and Brenda Jenkins believed they were simply squeezing a senior engineer who had outlived his political utility in their corporate matrix. In their blind arrogance, they had stepped directly onto an operational landmine capable of freezing the largest revenue stream in the company's history. That evening, I did not pour a drink, nor did I complain to my family over dinner. I went home to my quiet suburban house, prepared a simple meal, cleared off my study desk, and booted up my personal secure laptop. At precisely 8:15 in the evening, my mobile screen illuminated with an incoming call from Jason Croft. Jason was a former senior infrastructure director at Apexis who had resigned 9 months earlier after clashing with Victoria over her aggressive cost-cutting initiatives. "I heard the news through the internal engineering grapevine," Jason said without preamble. "Victoria moved even faster and more recklessly than we anticipated." I leaned back in my leather study chair, watching the rain hit the window pane. Executive arrogance always accelerates when people confuse authority with competence. How is Crestview Capital handling their enterprise expansion? Jason chuckled softly over the line. Charles Vance, our chief executive officer, has been watching your situation closely for months. He asked me twice last week whether you were ready to step away from Apexis. He wants to know if you will take a meeting with him tomorrow morning. I responded with absolute clarity. I will not transfer proprietary source code, copy client databases, or breach my enforceable restrictive covenants, Jason. Jason replied instantly. Charles does not want stolen files or corporate shortcuts, Grant. He wants your technical reputation, your architectural design capabilities, and your institutional knowledge. If you step away from Apexis right now, the enterprise market will react to the instability immediately. Crestview simply needs to be positioned to absorb the client overflow cleanly and legally. I looked out into the dark night. Tell Charles Vance I will meet him for breakfast at 7. Apexis Solutions has less than 5 business days before their structural foundation begins to crumble. The following morning, I walked into the Apexis corporate headquarters at my usual time of 8:15, holding my morning coffee in one hand and my laptop bag in the other as if it were any routine Thursday. That was the most effective tactic for navigating a corporate office environment filled with observant colleagues and middle managers. You do not rush, you do not glare, and you never display an emotional expression that corporate gossips can weaponize or mischaracterize later. I walked down the carpeted hallway, nodded politely to the reception staff, sat down at my corner desk, and logged into the administrative directory portal. I immediately began running targeted database queries against the mismatch roll code I had discovered on the bottom margin of the salary revision form. 20 minutes of methodical log analysis revealed the complete operational reality behind Victoria's plan. A draft administrative user profile had been quietly provisioned 14 days prior under the name Chloe Morgan. It was classified strictly under roll code 409B, with pending elevated administrative permissions linked directly to my primary production client databases. Beneath her profile was an extensive calendar trail showing reserved internal training blocks labeled as shadow onboarding sessions. My personal corporate calendar had been silently pre-allocated to conduct those intensive training sessions starting the following Monday morning. Victoria Cross had not merely threatened to find a replacement. She had already recruited a junior consultant at 1/3 of my salary and planned to manipulate me into training her for 3 weeks before discarding me as entirely. That was the most calculated and offensive aspect of her strategy. Not the 50% pay cut, nor the corporate deception, but the arrogant assumption that I would submissively hand over 12 years of hard-won architectural expertise while suffering a massive financial penalty. I spent the next 2 hours quietly securing my personal documentation, ensuring complete compliance with federal data protection standards and corporate security policies. I compiled my personal performance appraisals, historical patent filings, professional certifications, and technical design notes that I had authored prior to joining Apexis. I made certain to follow corporate compliance rules to the letter. I did not export customer databases, proprietary source repositories, or confidential financial metrics. I preserved strictly my personal intellectual property and the undeniable digital audit trail, documenting Victoria's premeditated replacement timeline. At precisely 11:30, Brenda Jenkins issued an urgent calendar invitation for a follow-up meeting in Victoria's executive suite. When I walked into the conference room, the environment was identical to the previous afternoon. The same polished mahogany table, the same chilly air conditioning, and the same rigid expectation of executive dominance. Victoria offered a tight, practiced corporate smile that failed to reach her eyes. Grant, we wanted to reconvene to ensure you have taken adequate time to align your professional expectations with the company's new fiscal reality. I sat down deliberately, placed a single manila folder on the table, and maintained an entirely even tone. Before we discuss alignment, Victoria, I want to confirm one detail for the record. Is this 50% salary reduction effective immediately, with zero reduction in my assigned client accounts, project scope, or technical deliverables? Victoria nodded with supreme confidence. That is correct, Grant. We expect your full dedication to the Phase 3 migration cutover. I reached into my folder, retrieved a signed legal document, and slid it across the mahogany table. Then please accept my formal resignation from Apexis Solutions. Effective immediately, due to material breach of executive employment terms and constructive discharge. Brenda Jenkins turned pale, her hands trembling slightly as her eyes dropped to the paper. Victoria froze in her seat, staring at the resignation notice as if it were written in an unreadable foreign script. "You cannot be serious, Grant," she said, her voice sharpening with sudden agitation. "The Phase 3 deployment Qtover begins in less than 72 hours. You cannot simply walk out of this building." I pointed to the highlighted statutory paragraph on the copy resting in front of me. "Under established employment law and Section 8 of my executive contract, a unilateral 50% reduction in base compensation constitutes constructive termination as a matter of law, relieving me of any mandatory notice period. I am leaving today." Victoria leaned forward over the table, her eyes narrowing into cold slits. "The executive job market is not going to welcome a 54-year-old architect with open arms, Grant." I stood up calmly, buttoned my suit jacket, and met her hostile gaze with steady composure. "No, Victoria, the market will not wait. But more importantly, your enterprise clients will not tolerate an unseasoned replacement during a high-stakes Qtover either. I am taking nothing that belongs to Apexis Solutions, but I am taking everything that allows this complex infrastructure to function. My technical judgment, my system logic, and my institutional memory." I turned on my heel and walked out of the executive suite. Within 45 minutes, I had packed my personal desk items into a small cardboard box, my 10-year service award, family photographs, and personal reference textbooks, and surrendered my physical access badge to security. My exit email to the engineering department was brief, immaculate, and strictly professional, expressing gratitude to my technical team without a single word of bitterness or corporate drama. Victoria undoubtedly believed that my physical exit concluded the conflict and left her in total control of the division. She failed to comprehend that the true operational catastrophe was only beginning to unfold. At precisely 2:15 that afternoon, less than 3 hours after I walked out of the building, the first massive structural tremor struck Victoria's office. Vanguard Health's Senior Vice President of Technology, Marcus Thorne, dispatched a high-priority emergency email directly to Victoria, copying Apexis Chief Executive Officer Richard Prescott and Chief Financial Officer Malcolm Turner. The email was brief, urgent, and alarmingly direct. Vanguard's automated enterprise security monitoring system had detected that Grant Sullivan's master administrative credentials had been suddenly revoked during an active pre-deployment configuration window. Marcus Thorne demanded an immediate emergency explanation as to why the principal enterprise architect, designated under Section 14.2 of their master service agreement, was no longer overseeing their $28 million cloud infrastructure transition. Panicking under the sudden, unexpected wave of C-suite scrutiny, Victoria Cross attempted to conceal the operational crisis by accelerating her original replacement timeline. She immediately ordered Chloe Morgan to lead an emergency technical video conference with Vanguard Health's senior engineering leadership that very afternoon. Victoria naively believed that polished PowerPoint presentations, confident delivery, and smooth corporate terminology would mask Chloe's absolute lack of practical architectural experience. It proved to be a catastrophic executive miscalculation. Within 10 minutes of the video conference convening, Marcus Thorne bypassed the introductory slides and began firing granular technical questions regarding the real-time database synchronization protocols during the upcoming Phase 3 Qtover. Chloe struggled visibly, stammering through generic script responses and repeatedly referencing high-level architectural diagrams she had clearly never implemented. When Marcus pressed further, asking how the proposed deployment script would prevent transaction serialization locks when processing 50,000 concurrent database requests per minute, Chloe froze. She muted her microphone, turned to Victoria with wide, panicked eyes, and whispered nervously. Victoria immediately interjected, attempting to cover the embarrassing silence with practiced corporate rhetoric. "Marcus, we are simply executing a planned strategic talent realignment to introduce fresh operational perspectives and agility to your enterprise account. Chloe is backed by our entire engineering organization." Marcus Thorne was a battle-tested enterprise executive who had spent 25 years managing complex technology infrastructure. He was entirely immune to corporate public relations spin. "Victoria, I am not interested in a strategic talent realignment speech," Marcus said, his voice dropping an octave. "I am asking a direct engineering question. How does your new lead plan to prevent multi-region database corruption when 30,000 concurrent user sessions hit the bridge on Sunday night?" Grant Sullivan engineered that custom synchronization engine. Does Miss Morgan even know which configuration parameters control the transaction isolation levels? When Chloe failed to provide even a rudimentary technical explanation, Marcus Thorne cut her off mid-sentence. "This conference call is over. Under Section 14.2 of our Master Service Agreement, Apexis Solutions has modified key personnel without 90 days prior written notice during a critical project milestone. Vanguard Health is issuing a formal stop work order, effective immediately. All pending quarterly milestone payments totaling $12 million are officially frozen until a comprehensive independent technical audit is completed." The line went dead with a sharp click. The silence inside Victoria's conference room was terrifying. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, the financial shockwaves of Vanguard's stop work order hit the top floor of Apexis headquarters. Chief Financial Officer Malcolm Turner burst into Chief Executive Officer Richard Prescott's office. Freezing $12 million in quarterly milestone payments would not only cause Apexis to miss its published Wall Street revenue targets by 24%, but it would also trigger automatic debt covenant defaults across the company's primary credit facilities. Richard Prescott immediately summoned an emergency briefing in the main executive boardroom, demanding the presence of Victoria Cross, Brenda Jenkins, internal compliance officers, and senior corporate legal counsel. Victoria arrived attempting to frame the escalating disaster as an unprovoked attack by a bitter former employee. "Grant Sullivan acted in extreme bad faith," Victoria claimed aggressively. "He abandoned his critical responsibilities 72 hours before a major cutover out of personal malice over standard corporate compensation adjustments." However, internal compliance officer Julian Vance stepped forward and presented the unalterable electronic system audit logs. The digital paper trail revealed that Chloe Morgan's administrative profile and elevated database permissions had been provisioned 14 days prior to Grant's salary review meeting. The immutable system logs proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that Victoria had pre-planned Grant's removal in secret, concealed the operational risks from executive leadership, and deliberately bypassed the contractually mandated client notification requirements. Corporate legal counsel turned directly to Richard Prescott and delivered a devastating legal assessment. "This was not an unexpected employee resignation, Richard. Victoria executed an unauthorized personnel action that directly breached our primary enterprise client contract. Apexis is now exposed to massive breach of contract damages, operational liability, and shareholder derivative lawsuits for gross breach of fiduciary duty." While Victoria attempted to defend her disastrous decisions, the external market reacted with astonishing speed. That evening, Crestview Capital issued a formal national press release announcing the appointment of Grant Sullivan as Senior Vice President of Enterprise Architecture. The news sent immediate shockwaves across the technology sector. Within 3 hours of the announcement, the executive leadership teams of Apex Global and Pinnacle Financial, the two other major enterprise accounts I had managed, submit formal legal notices to Apexis. They demanded immediate proof that their multi-million-dollar cloud transitions would not suffer from the same gross management incompetence that had just derailed Vanguard Health. By Friday morning, the situation inside Apexis Solutions had escalated from an operational disaster into an existential corporate crisis. Richard Prescott ordered a complete forensic audit of Victoria's department and scheduled an emergency session with the board of directors. During the preliminary legal review, corporate legal counsel uncovered an even more catastrophic legal vulnerability that Victoria had completely overlooked. 7 years earlier, when Apexis was struggling to build its core migration architecture, I had independently developed, tested, and patented an automated data transformation algorithm. I held registered patents under Title 35, Section 271 of the United States Code, alongside registered software copyrights under Title 17, Section 106. When I joined Apexis as principal architect, I had granted the firm a non-exclusive, non-transferable internal user license that was explicitly tied to my active continuous employment with the company. My executive agreement specified clearly that upon the termination of my employment for any reason, Apexis's legal authorization to deploy my proprietary migration algorithms in new client cutovers would expire within 30 days unless a separate commercial licensing agreement was negotiated and executed. Victoria Cross had foolishly assumed that all software code running on corporate servers automatically belonged to Apexis in perpetuity. She had no understanding that by forcing my constructive discharge, she had initiated a legal countdown that would revoke Apexis's authority to execute the core migration scripts powering Phase 3. Deploying those patented algorithms without an active license would constitute willful patent and copyright infringement. Under federal law, exposing Apexis to statutory damages of up to $150,000 per occurrence, alongside mandatory federal injunctions that would shut down their entire cloud hosting infrastructure. Realizing the terrifying scope of the legal catastrophe Victoria had created, Richard Prescott bypassed Victoria entirely and called my personal mobile phone at precisely 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. His voice was stripped of executive arrogance, sounding strained, desperate, and deeply apologetic. "Grant, I am calling you directly as Chief Executive Officer of Apexis Solutions," Richard said, his tone urgent. "We fully acknowledge that Victoria Cross acted far outside her authority and handled your compensation review with appalling judgment. I am prepared to reinstate your full position immediately, double your previous base salary to $480,000, grant you 50,000 equity shares, and place Victoria's entire operational division under your direct executive leadership." I listened to Richard's emergency proposal with quiet, unshakable composure. 12 years ago, early in my career, such an extraordinary offer might have seemed irresistible. But age 54 brings a profound, uncompromising clarity regarding corporate promises made under panic. "Richard," I replied softly, "you cannot buy back institutional trust with a panic clause after your executive team spent weeks secretly building an administrative framework to expropriate my life's work." Victoria did not make a simple operational error. She executed a calculated policy of contempt. The legal and financial catastrophe Apexis now faces is the direct mathematical consequence of her choices. Richard pleaded desperately for a temporary licensing arrangement to salvage the Vanguard Health migration. "Grant, if Vanguard cancels their contract, our market valuation drops by 20% overnight. Can we negotiate a temporary emergency license for the Phase 3 cutover scripts under Title 35? My professional terms were presented to Victoria on Thursday morning. I answered calmly. She chose to replace me with a junior profile under Roll Code 409B. You should allow her chosen candidate to demonstrate the operational value of that decision. My intellectual property licenses expire in 23 days, and my legal counsel has already served your legal department with a formal notice of license revocation. By Monday morning, Vanguard Health formally exercised its contractual right to terminate its master service agreement with Apexis Solutions for cause, citing uncured material breach of key personnel provisions and operational misrepresentation. Simultaneously, Vanguard signed an emergency enterprise transition agreement with Crestview Capital, transferring their entire $28 million cloud migration project directly to my new division. Within 48 hours, Apex Global and Pinnacle Financial followed suit, exercising their contract exit clauses to align their critical infrastructure with Crestview. Apexis Solutions had lost $45 million in recurring annual contract value in less than 6 business days, entirely because an arrogant executive thought she could save $120,000 by slashing the compensation of the one man who held the entire technical architecture together. On the following Tuesday morning, the board of directors of Apexis Solutions convened an extraordinary emergency session to address the complete collapse of the enterprise migration division. Board Chair Richard Prescott, presented the final forensic audit report compiled by independent legal investigators and corporate governance experts. The findings were damning beyond measure. The audit report documented in meticulous detail how Victoria Cross had engaged in gross mismanagement, breached her fiduciary duties to shareholders under corporate law, and violated federal employment notification guidelines under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, also known as 29 U.S.C. Section 2101, by attempting a covert structural downsizing without board authorization or legal review. The board of directors acted with swift, unyielding severity. Victoria Cross was terminated immediately for cause, stripping her of all unvested stock options, executive severance packages, and accrued performance bonuses. Furthermore, the board authorized corporate litigation against Victoria under breach of fiduciary duty statutes to recover a portion of the $45 million in corporate damages resulting from her unauthorized actions. Brenda Jenkins was stripped of her title as Human Resources Director, demoted to a junior administrative clerk, and permanently barred from participating in executive personnel decisions. Chloe Morgan was quietly reassigned to basic technical help desk support after her complete inability to manage enterprise architecture was fully documented in board records. To prevent a recurrence of such an executive disaster, the board enacted sweeping corporate governance mandates across Apexis Solutions. Under the newly ratified bylaws, no executive officer could modify the compensation, title, or operational responsibilities of key technical personnel on client-critical projects without prior written authorization from corporate legal counsel, the chief financial officer, and formal written sign-off from the affected client's executive sponsor. The era of arbitrary corporate arrogance and unvetted executive maneuvering at Apexis had come to a humiliating, permanent, and extremely costly conclusion. Meanwhile, at Crestview Capital, my new enterprise architecture division flourished beyond expectations. Joined by Jason Croft as my senior operating partner, we successfully executed the Vanguard Health enterprise migration ahead of schedule, seamlessly transitioning their complex database architecture across multiple regions without experiencing a single second of service downtime or data loss. Over the next 6 months, our division expanded rapidly, attracting top-tier engineering talent who departed the toxic environment at Apexis to join an organization built on technical excellence, mutual respect, and transparent leadership. Looking back on the entire ordeal from my quiet home office on a crisp autumn evening, I felt no surge of triumph or desire to gloat over Victoria's ruin. Genuine professional satisfaction does not derive from petty vengeance. It comes from watching the objective, unyielding laws of economics, contracts, and legal compliance restore balance to a corporate system that lost its moral compass. Victoria Cross believed that a polished executive title granted her the absolute authority to degrade an experienced engineer's value. She forgot that in the modern enterprise landscape, true authority is not derived from a corner office, an expensive suit, or condescending rhetoric, but from deep domain expertise, ethical integrity, and the quiet courage to walk away when your worth is denied. They called me a key employee only when they needed me to maintain their illusion of stability. I only proved my true value when I walked away and left them to face the reality of their own incompetence.